I think talking is one of our greatest pleasures, and it's also a means to connect to others. It's how we review our ideas, and it's also how we watch our minds work. Yet sitting in meditation and watching thoughts for 30 minutes or so is not very enjoyable. And I wonder why that would be true. Probably because not only do we see that our thoughts are not under our control, but we also have to be very patient while we're watching it since we have so little control. In fact, the more we try to forcibly stop the thoughts, the more they fill our minds and they arouse our emotions, making sitting very difficult. We could be sitting half asleep and still see our thoughts moving without let up. We're always assuming that everything is under our control, our body, our speech, and our mind. We assume that nothing happens unless we actually control it. But a short time of sitting in meditation shows us that body movements, emotional urges, and thinking are not under our control. We can mess with them, but we can't make them stop just by willing it. Breathing is what the body does, whether we're conscious or not. Thinking is what the mind does, whether we wish it to or not. Breathing doesn't confuse us because we know it's our natural action. But thinking does confuse us because we assume the contents that we see reflect our true state of being. But thoughts persist without our decision, and in spite of our beliefs, they do not reflect our true being. But instead, they reveal a passing possibility. If we decide that negative thoughts, angry thoughts, and emotions reflect how we really feel, then if we cling to that feeling, we develop reasons and past history to prove it to ourselves. But if we watched it just appear and move in our minds more like a dark cloud passing through, we'd only see that our minds are very creative, and our emotions color them outrageously. If we take up the reality, which is only an abstraction at first, only partially present, we make it into a concrete reality by our decision to cling to it. If you watched words flow from your mouth, your creativity would be surprising to you. It seems that we often think with our mouths as much as with our minds. And using our thoughts and words creatively, we actually could enliven our lives in a very healthy way. But most of what we say is thrown out in emotion, or as a reluctance to admit silence into the present, or because we became lost in a storyline with another person and stopped acting with discretion. If you spent about 5 minutes talking and then stopped it entirely and looked at your mind, you'd probably find it spinning with words. Words in your mouth and the words in your mind encourage mutual activity. It's like putting your finger in the spokes of a tiny wheel and spinning it. It can be very exhausting. Every event in your mind of words is a possibility, but only that. If you take up the possibility, then you turn what at first is unformed, like smoke, and make it into a pathway of activity. And if that's continued, our karma then will lead us into actually living it. We don't have to take up any thought or emotion, or sensation for that matter, that presents itself to our mind. We can observe the life of the thought world and the emotion world as if looking at a tiny enclosed world that doesn't have to be released into our world. something like a little snow globe, but with sparkling words and emotional colors. But we can look at it and learn from it without having to live it too. If you want to awaken to silence in your world, see how talking spins the thinking mind. This doesn't mean to stop sharing or stop relating to others or to disappear in some kind of a nether region, but stop talking just to fill in space. Silence will become available when space is open, because it's our natural condition. We enclose silence in a belief that it's impossible and beyond our comprehension. And it is beyond talking comprehension. But silence is our natural state and is always present, just covered by thoughts, words, and beliefs. Part of the discipline of body, speech, and mind is learning the difference between speaking to communicate and speaking to fill in space. In a dokusan, there's often much talking, but talking in which someone is carefully looking at their words to make sure what they say is really what they mean. In true camaraderie, the intention is to communicate relationship. Words that come from the heart seldom intend to deceive or mislead. But even in such examples, there is a time to stop because the intent has reached its goal. To continue is to spin the thinking mind wheel. And a day spent quietly calms body and mind, bringing one closer to silence. In a monastery, there is sometimes casual talk, but not often. In a sesshin, there is no talk. The sense of silence that one feels then seems to come from the outside, but is really emanating from within each one present. To experience one's natural condition of silence is to open joy in one's life. If what Suzuki Roshi said is true, when you bow, the whole world bows, then you could also say, when you are silent, the whole world is silent. And what a gift that is to the world. A brief moment of silence, a brief moment of peace for everyone. Thank you. And if you have any questions or comments or something you'd like to say, feel free to say it. And here's Peter joining us. There you go. Yeah, there we are. Do you have anything to say? Add to it? Subtract from it? John?
I just wanted to say that after the first silence talk that you gave, well, I think maybe the first one, maybe a month or two ago or whenever it was ever so helpful for me because I think for so long, the things that I felt like during meditation or during my day that I was attached to, I was trying to figure out techniques for pushing them away. But when you talked about just sitting with them and not trying to put them away, but sitting with them in silence, it really changed the way that I guess I process and I deal with these things. And it was incredibly insightful. And I wanted to thank you for that because it's been a change in my practice. So thank you.
You're welcome, John. Matt?
Yeah. Hi. Hopefully you have the last thing that you said written down and can repeat it because I'm too tired this morning to remember it offhand, but it did. It grabbed hold.
The whole thing is written down, Matt.
What was that you said?
I said the whole thing is written down.
Oh, great. Could you repeat the last thing about everybody is silent with you or something like that?
You mean Suzuki Roshi's quote?
Yeah, please.
Yes, when he said, if it's true that what he said was, when you bow, the whole world bows, You could also say when you are silent, the whole world is silent. And that's a gift to the world, a brief moment of silence, a brief moment of peace for everyone.
For everyone. That's
Everyone. The
that's
whole,
what stuck with me.
yeah.
It, would you mind elaborating on
When we act within our world, everything in the world acts with us in the same way because our world is our world. Therefore, everything that we do is reflected in everything else. So the bad that we see, the good that we see, everything is us in as we reflect ourselves. So we can start to work to change that just by sitting, because whenever we sit, it's the same thing. If it's true that he said when you bow, everyone, the whole world bows, then when we do anything, when we chant, when we do meditation, we're setting that up as a kind of template in our world for right action, right speech, right thought, etc. So it's a way we can work to make the world a better place from our point of view of just sitting on a cushion.
that? Okay, so our world being our mind.
All right.
Jane's mind, my mind. Uh, uh, that's the world that we're bowing with. That's or when the whole world bows, because that's my world in my mind. When I'm silent, that's my world.
That's correct. Yes.
Therefore,
When
yes. Okay.
yes. When you're silent, your whole world is silent for that brief moment.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, so we can change, in a sense, you can work to create good merit from that point of view of if you are quiet, everything in your world is quiet. But again, it's for that moment, it's not like all the time. It's just a reflection of you at that moment. And that's what I was saying. When you're in a monastery and you're walking around silent all the time and just doing your job, you sense this wonderful peace in the whole area, but it's not actually coming from the area, it's coming from the person who senses that.
Thank you very much for including that in the talk.
You're welcome.
Very helpful.
Sandy.
Um, about 3 years into my practice, I had a lot of course, um, monkey mind going on as I sat and uh, couldn't quiet anything. And one day I was sitting over near where you're sitting, facing those doors, the white doors. And for some reason, my whole, that just that one sitting of the day, even though we do two, um, I actually somehow managed, I don't know how, but I don't know if it was a letting go, but I achieved a half hour of silence. And like you said, it was a peaceful feeling. It was a refreshing, peaceful feeling. And it hasn't happened to me for any length of time like that anymore. Uh, I get occasional little bits of silence when I'm sitting, but it was something that I would like to be able to attain again. But if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But it's even around my house, I find that uh, when I can have moments of silence, for instance, when Howard's out gardening instead of in front of the TV, it's the peace level um, seems to arise. Or if I'm in my studio and I'm drawing or painting, uh, my mind quiets, and it's just like I feel like I'm just going on instinct when I'm working, and it's much more peaceful, much more peaceful.
Sandy,
And
what I was trying to say in this talk is that that quiet state is our natural state. It's not a state that we acquire, and it's not a state that we encourage to become. It's what we already are. We are that
right,
silent state. So when you're, say, with Howard, and Howard is like making some noise with the TV or something, that noise can become sound when you're silent inside, when you're quiet and calm. And when you hear noise in a lot of silence, like in a monastery where you hear sound, it's very different than hearing noise as something which disturbs you, because it's more like a splash in a lake. Then the quietness of the lake surrounds that splash, and you hear it as an isolated sound. And it doesn't sound like something that is constantly bombarding your mental state. So
Right.
don't worry about that. When you had a state of silence for a while, it's already there. It's never left. And all you do is just pay attention when you're eating something really delicious, and note how you calm down and want to only focus on that delicious taste. Everything in you gets quiet when that happens. Just pay
That's
attention
right.
to those wonderfully quiet moments in little things, and you'll find that it hasn't actually left. It's still there.
Right. Just the mind does a great job at trying to cover it up.
That's right, exactly. The mind works in wondrous ways.
Certainly does. Of
Yeah.
course, you had to bring up food.
Well, for me, that's what silence is when I taste something really good, like a dish of ice cream or something, and it tastes
Right.
really wonderful.
Right. You don't, there's no time for words. You just have to enjoy.
You just are, this big dish of ice cream is right in the middle of a big space of silence, yes. And just pay
Yes.
attention to that. Those silent moments are there
So
already.
that's a good reason to eat ice cream.
To eat something that you really, really like, yes.
Yes. Thank you, Jane.
You're welcome. Rachel.
I worked in an ER for some years, a very long time ago. And with time, there could be situations where I guess you'd say it was very noisy. And someone could say it was chaotic, but I noticed that with time, it was all information. And it would depend on your function. It's different if you were a nurse or a doctor, or you got the credit card, whatever your function was. But what I mean is it was not necessarily alarming the way it was to probably most people who would enter the door. It could even be quiet in a way, because the sounds, it was like radio waves. You were listening for information, and it was not necessarily disturbing. Is that somewhat what you mean?
Yes, that it's your perspective on it. It makes a big difference. When I was in Japan, and I was in a very hyper state of hearing noises and everything, and I complained to the teacher there about the noise and how hard it was to do anything with all this noise. And she said, "Don't worry about it. When you're really tired, you could sleep through anything." And I thought, okay, that sounds good. But when I went home, I often took naps in the afternoon, and right at the time I usually took my nap, somebody next door started using a jackhammer on the road, and it was really, really noisy. And I laid there thinking all kinds of negative thoughts, and then it hit me, oh, what the heck? If what she said is true, I can just go to sleep. And I turned over and I went right to sleep. And I woke up like 3 hours later, and it was totally done. And I thought, well, that's a big eye opener. It really is perspective. Yeah, so
Thank you.
you're welcome. Mike.
As someone who's always had to sleep in noisy environments, like living next to freeways or next to busy streets, you can ignore the noise. I find that what I got from your speech is that if you're in the moment, whether eating ice cream or reading something or whatever, there is no noise, because you're not aware of anything else but the moment that you're in, and you're concentrating on that. And so you can have silence. I've said this a million times. You can have silence and noise because you're not paying attention to the noise. You're like Sandy's saying, she's painting, or you're eating ice cream, or I'm reading a book, or I'm drawing, or something like that. That is silence, because just doing what you're doing. Your brain isn't anywhere else but where you are at. And so, yes, you'll hear the trucks and the cars and the planes and the jackhammers and stuff, but they just bounce off your ears because your mind is, doing what it's doing. You're concentrating on sleeping. And I find that that's how I used to be able to sleep with my parents. I lived in their house. We lived right across the street from the Ventura Freeway. And I would wake up because the freeway would be quiet all of a sudden. It's like, wait a minute, I would hear the silence and not the noise. And so that's what I have got from your talk. I don't know if that's correct, but is that, yes, you're going to have noise around you no matter what, but you don't have to pay attention to it because it's just noise. And after a while, you don't even notice it. And all of a sudden it's kind of quiet, even with the noise.
That's your experience. Everybody's experience is their own with noise and with silence. And who else? Peter, do you have any? John, Chris, Sandy, where? Oh.
So, sort of riffing on what Michael said just now, and also I think relevant to what you had said, I was just thinking like the concept of noise and silence, just that general concept of designating some sort of special quality to the absence of stimulus or the presence of stimulus, seems like we really only think about that with the faculty of hearing. Like, if our eyes are closed, we're looking at darkness. If our eyes are open, we're looking at whatever's in front of us, whether it's well lit or not. But anyways, we don't really think about the darkness as like the visual equivalent of silence, or the absence of smells as like the olfactory equivalent of silence, or anything like that. So like silence has this special quality to it that is unique to sound. And I was just sort of thinking that's interesting, and just sort of wondering if, we can treat the faculty of sound or hearing in the same way we treat the other faculties, and not really think about the presence or absence of stimuli as special in the same way we do with the presence or absence of stimuli in the hearing faculty.
Yeah, actually, you're bringing up an interesting point, Chris, about the silence and noise is two ends of the balance. And actually, it doesn't have to be divided like that, because we're separating one in half, and the other half of silence would be noise in that sense. And I think that's a different silence than I'm talking about. There's quiet and then there's silence, and the silence is not so much that noise stops as that noise simply isn't there. And it's not like anything that, it's more like everything stops in a quiet way, but it's not because the noise disappears, because you hear noise, but you hear it differently. For example, say you're walking on a road and your mind is very quiet. You hear the sound of the crunching of your feet on the stones and things like that. But that doesn't sound like noise in that sense. So what I'm talking about is not the noise value and the quiet value, but what is under both of them, which is a sense of extreme peace or quiet or something like that, in which your senses are still functioning perfectly well.
So, kind of like what Mike said, sounds can be part of silence or can be included in silence. They don't have to be noise, and whether or not they're noise is really just dependent on whether we sort of endorse a little story our minds have made up about being disturbed by certain sounds and not by others.
Yes. And so it can exist in the middle of eating ice cream. Your whole senses may come to a halt while you're eating this wonderful taste or having a wonderful drink of something, and all your senses have just stopped trying to identify or talk about or comment on anything, and so you're very quiet while you're experiencing the taste. So yeah, silence is us, actually. It's who we are, and whether we're we take sound and turn it into noise or not.
Would you say that silence doesn't necessarily have to describe a condition related to sound only?
Yeah, I think so. But I have to think about that further, Chris. Yes, but I do think that's true. But I still have to think about how to put that into words because I don't know that one. Sandy, how about you?
Oh, um, way back when I read a something that Suzuki Roshi said, and there's no way I could quote it, but I can kind of say what I thought it was. That when somebody had asked him about sitting and or a bird, there was the sound of a bird, and someone asked about was it disturbing, and he said that that something to the effect that he and the bird became one um, when it came into his hearing, that he identified the bird, and um, that always struck me as a like a moment of silence, that he became one with the bird, and it wasn't something outside that was waking him up or disturbing him from its squawking or chirping. And it is kind of it was just a nice, the way he stated it. It was just, the picture was so nice. It was such a pleasant, quiet kind of picture.
I remember that. That
Yeah.
was on the tape, right?
It was, I think it was
A
on
video of some kind.
well, I read it in one of his first books, actually, I
Yeah,
think.
it was on a recording he made, a video recording also. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Peter, you want to say
And
anything about this point?
yeah, and it's also the same, like when I'm drawing, it's the pencil and I become one. And it's it's interesting. It's like when you relax and let go and really are there, um, you become one with so much around you that you can feel it. You can feel the oneness that's there. Uh, it's a really pleasant thing to be able to feel that connection. Really nice. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Let me take a chance right now. We have a new face in our screens today, and that face is Paul Disco. And Paul Disco and Jane and I met at Tassajara in 1967. He was married I guess he was with somebody at that point, and we used to hang out together as a kind of two couples every night after dinner and before zazen. And our relationship has continued over these years. And Paul, of course, many of you know, Paul, the altar was built by Paul. The tons were built in his company, but ordered by Paul and donated by Paul. The Han outside we hit to start things off, and of course Paul was here to put in the doors too. So but Paul also is a Zen teacher, of course, and so he's here. I hope that he'll be coming, and he'll maybe talk sometimes. We'll see what happens. But anyway, welcome, Paul. You want to say a few words to say hello?
Thank you, Peter. Yes, I'm very happy to join. Zoom is a wonderful thing that you can be in many places that you could never be before. So this is flying to LA is very tiresome, especially at my age and physical condition. But this is wonderful. I can arrive without any great stress and be with some old acquaintances and make some new ones. Peter doesn't actually remember, but we knew my wife at the time, and I knew Jane before it was Jane and Peter. So It goes back
That's
even,
Lord,
true.
even
That's
oh,
true.
that's, I said couple.
That's
I don't know
true.
why I said that for. We were not a couple.
That's true
As a matter of
because
fact, yeah. We were kind of like, it was kind of strange actually because it was later than we were a couple.
anyway, it's a long time ago now, and I value that experience of knowing them for back in that time. And Saturday is my day off. I have a fairly active schedule, even though I'm supposed to be retired. But anyway, I'm looking forward to joining you on Saturdays.
oh, we are too, Paul.
Yeah.
It's really good to see you here.
Peter, should I apologize to Paul for scorching your altar all that wait time ago?
Thanks for telling us.
I knew somebody had built it for you, and I just sat there like, oh my God, that's the guy who built the altar, and I'm the one that set it on fire. I apologize.
Yeah, the top of the altar top has a piece of incense exploded on top, and it burned. It made some dark marks on it. It's a part of his character, yeah.
Yeah, that's what everybody says. It's
Yeah,
a part of his
yeah,
character.
Yeah, so. Well, anyway, the wood in the altar is quite special. Paul, in his previous occupation, used to get in Oakland, at least, and maybe in San Francisco as well. Whenever the city had to cut down a tree, they would tell Paul. I guess I don't know how it worked exactly, but something like this, and he would come and get the tree, and then he'd make lumber out of it. Ultimately, he'd dry it and make lumber out of it. So we have our altar is in all reclaimed wood, you might say, that Paul has, and anyway, that Paul has still has actually in his shop. He has a shop in Oakland. Okay, everybody. Well, anyway, I guess we will go ahead and have our service.